Damn, he's dying right before my eyes. Ellie gasped, her blood-soaked hands never ceasing to press against the stranger's wound. In an instant, an unassuming diner in Flagstaff transformed into a battlefield. The crack of gunfire, the shout of panicked patrons, and then only the faint, ragged breaths of a former SEAL clinging to life. No one dared to approach him. No one but her, a young nurse who had never been so close to death. She held him there with every ounce of faith that this life was still worth saving. And that very act changed her life forever. The glass door chimed as Ellie Hart stepped into the Blue Mesa Diner, a vintage roadside eatery on Highway 89 where truckers pull over, soldiers on leave drop in, and locals call each other by name. The scent of frying grease, cured meats, and strong coffee mingled in the tranquil air of a summer noon in the Arizona desert. Ellie planned a quick meal before returning to the hospital. Her morning ER shift had left her with a quiet exhaustion, a weariness invisible on the surface, but deep in her finger joints. She slid into a booth by the window. Dusty sunlight slanted through the grimy glass, casting a pale glow across her hair like an aged memory. Black and white photographs lined the walls, cowboys framed beneath rodeo banners, border patrol agents leaning on barbed wire fences, and unnamed faces staring into the lens as though they had never left. It felt oddly peaceful. Yet, as always, peace was only a thin veneer ready to crack at fate's first blow. At first, she didn't notice the man in the corner. He sat silently, sun-darkened, face downcast, fingers twirling a coffee cup. Nothing stood out until he rolled up his sleeve to reach for a sugar packet. An old tattoo appeared on his forearm, an anchor wrapped in bat wings, and beneath it a sequence every combat medic knows: Bud, S, Class 213. Ellie recognized it instantly, the emblem of the SEALs, those trained to survive when no one else could. But this man didn't carry the legend. He seemed subdued, burdened, as if he carried a war in his lungs and was breathing ordinary air for the first time in years. She hesitated whether to greet him when the diner door slammed open as if kicked. The crash drew startled glances. Two masked youths burst in. One brandished a pistol, the other a matte black combat knife. "Nobody moves. I swear I'll pull the trigger." Time froze. Ellie felt the air drain from her lungs. No one shouted. No one rose. Only the man in the corner, the veteran, pushed his chair back and stood, straightening his spine. No threatening gesture, no aggressive move. He simply locked eyes with the gunman, his tone calm as if addressing a trainee. "You don't have to do this." That moment stretched a heartbeat. Then a shot rang out. The blast tore the stillness in two, echoed off the faded blue walls, made a child scream and porcelain clatter to the floor. Ellie didn't see him fall, only the spray of blood from his torso, then his body collapsing onto the tile like a rotting sandbag. Screams erupted, some dove under tables. One fled through the back door. Ellie remained frozen, her gaze fixed on the soldier fallen in the middle of the diner. The blood pooled and spread, fast like time slipping away with his life. And in that fraction of a second she understood. Peace, from the start, had been an illusion. And sometimes, the only thing that holds someone in place is a person who cannot turn away.
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
The crack of the bullet wasn't loud, but it was enough to split the world in two. Before an ordinary scene where spoons clinked against plates and the aroma of grilled meat wove through the whir of ceiling fans, after a cold void of violence that drew everything into silence, Walter Beckett collapsed as if someone had cut the life support tether. His body slammed onto the tile floor. One hand groped briefly before falling limp. The blood didn't spurt like in the movies, it seeped dark and thick, spreading rapidly across his faded shirt. It wasn't dramatic, just absolute and merciless, something that could never be undone. Panic erupted like a storm. Chairs toppled, dishes shattered. People screamed, ran, dove under tables, collided with one another, trampling handbags and napkins. A child screamed for her mother. A woman crumpled to the floor, clutching her head. But amid it all, one person did not run. Ellie Hart doesn't clearly remember when she stood. She only knows her body lunged toward the old man. The moment she saw that first ribbon of blood carve its path like a scar across the earth, instinct overcame fear. The roar around her faded until all she could hear was the frantic pounding of his heart echoing in her palm. She slid past a spilled cup of coffee, sidestepped shards of glass, then knelt beside Walter. Her knee burned as it hit the floor. She had no medical kit, no gloves, nothing but her shaking hands. But she knew what to do. Her hand pressed hard against his abdomen where the bullet had passed through, no questions asked. She felt warm blood seep through her fingers. With her free hand, she grabbed a cloth napkin from the nearest table, folded it, and pressed it down like a makeshift bandage. Walter's eyes fluttered. His breathing was shallow and ragged. She leaned in, feeling his faint breaths brush her cheek. Airway breathing circulation, she repeated silently. The 3 steps she knew too well, one by one. Just like during simulations, but this time there was no instructor, no mannequin, no second chance. She checked his wrist for a pulse weak, but there. She held that wrist firmly, as if life could flow back through the skin. A server yelled something. Someone yanked open the back door, but she didn't look up. She couldn't afford to lose focus. Blood continued to flow. She shifted her weight, placing her entire forearm over the wound, using her body weight to press down. His body twitched with each compression. Ellie knew he might have a ruptured liver or a damaged major artery. Every second bled another piece of him away, and each compression risked further injury. But doing nothing meant certain death. She refused to accept that. She spoke only once, her voice thick with gun smoke and tears as she leaned close to his ear. "I'm a nurse. You're not dying here." It wasn't a promise. It was a command. The distant wail of a siren echoed outside. She didn't turn her head. She focused on the blood, on the breaths, on keeping him here with her, in this world for just one more second. Someone recorded it. Someone else fled. But amid the shattered glass and horror of the diner, there was only a young woman kneeling beside a dying veteran refusing to let go. She wasn't a doctor, not a soldier, not a hero, but in that moment, she was the only one brave enough to act. Wait, one more thing. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you love inspiring stories, and don't forget to leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It always feels amazing to see the world come together to share a single meaningful moment. Blood had soaked through the cloth, seeping between her fingers and staining the pale pink silicone band of her medical watch, the small gift from her mother before graduation dark red, as though life itself was draining from a body that should never have been lying on cold tile. She switched arms, pressing her elbow down, using the full weight of her slight frame atop the gaping wound. Her legs slipped on the slick mixture of blood and cooking grease from the kitchen floor. Nothing was stable. No one supported her. Only the steady, hoarse count of CPR. 1, 2, 3, 4. She dared not pause, dared not think. Walter Beckett, a former SEAL who had crossed firestorms in Fallujah, held the line on mine-strewn roads of Helmand, and survived covert operations in Somalia, lay here now, in a peaceful American diner, felled by a nameless robber's bullet. Perhaps he had prepared for this. Perhaps he told himself he was ready. But Ellie refused to let it become reality. She didn't know he once told his comrades, "If I ever go down, let me go." She'd never heard his war stories. She didn't know the cost he paid just to sit quietly in that corner booth. But she knew blood never lies, and no one deserves to die alone, with strangers turning away. Around her, people froze in fear. They huddled under tables, behind the counter, in the restroom. Some brandished phones to record, but none stepped closer. Only she and Walter, surrounded by an empty circle of onlookers peering through screens, yet doing nothing. Ellie drew a deep breath, shifted her position, and leaned close to feel his breath. His chest rose and fell like a flag in a windless breeze, barely at all. She checked his pupils, slow to react. One hand maintained pressure, the other rifled through her scrub pocket for a pen, the only object even remotely usable as a makeshift airway tube, if she had to go further. Her mind no longer grappled with right or wrong, it knew only one thing: keep him alive, even if only for a minute. A heartbeat, a breath. She'd never worked on a battlefield, but she understood what makes all the difference between life and death presence. No one should die alone. No one should die without someone fighting for them. When he let out a faint gasp, his body contracting in reflex, Ellie gritted her teeth and pressed harder. Blood surged again, flooding back into her palm like a warning bell. No monitors, no IV lines, no morphine, no glaring lights, no supervising physician, only a young woman kneeling soaked in blood between a crying child and distant alarms. Someone shouted they'd called 911, but she couldn't rely on that. She couldn't wait. Every second he lost another part of himself. She pressed down as though transferring her breath into his veins. Her hair stuck to her temple, her knees burned, her heart pounded, her ribs ached with each compression. But she did not stop. She never stopped. Because if she stopped, who would continue? A bead of sweat slid down Walter's cheek, tracing the path of blood like an unformed tear. In his clouded gaze, she saw not surrender, but memory. The soldier who'd witnessed unspeakable horrors was now being held here by a stranger, not with weapons, but with courage. She squeezed harder, resting her forehead against his, whispering a prayer, not for God but for him. "Stay with me. Please. Stay." No response. Yet she persisted, because somewhere deep inside she believed she could not be the first to let go. And perhaps, for men like Walter who never allowed themselves to be saved, the greatest miracle is someone refusing to let them slip away. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink of water. Then stay tuned for the surprising twists ahead. Comment 1 if you're moved by this story and let us know you're still here. Ellie couldn't remember how she left the diner. Every movement afterward seemed driven by an autopilot of self-preservation. Her legs carried her forward, her hands performed the motions, words left her lips, but her mind stood apart, like an unpiloted body, propelled by the inertia of shock. She arrived at her small rental room at the end of a quiet street in North Flagstaff, her forearm still flecked with dried blood. She didn't bother to remove her makeup or change her clothes. She slipped off her shoes, stepped over the frayed edge rug, and collapsed onto the edge of the bed as if the weight of the world had landed on her shoulders. The room was dark, the window sealed tight, save for the pale yellow streetlight filtering through the blinds in slashes across the ceiling. The wall clock ticked steadily. Normally, Ellie would ignore that sound. But tonight, it felt like a hammer striking each minute she had yet to learn the fate of the man she'd fought so hard to save. Walter Beckett. She only knew his name from the hurried shout someone made as the medics carried him away. No further details, no police officer, no hospital staff. She wasn't family, not the attending nurse, not on any notification list. She was just a young woman who had knelt in blood and despair and then been quietly left behind by the world once it was all over. But in truth, nothing was over. Not for her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Walter's cloudy gaze fixed on the ceiling, beads of sweat and blood tracing his temple like memories flooding out one last time. She remembered the crack of ribs under her hands as she performed compressions, a noise she'd only read about in medical texts, now a gruesome reality beneath her palms. She remembered his ragged gasps, and someone exclaiming from behind, "Is she doing it right?" But nobody answered. Nobody knew. Only the distant wail of the ambulance siren down the long street, and the echo of fleeing footsteps, then silence. A silence that wasn't comforting or relieved, but a void where every question swayed in her chest with no reply. She opened her phone, scoured the news, nothing. The hospital site hadn't been updated. No messages, no calls. Not a single confirmation that he lived or died. And so each night became a trial. Ellie was accused, witness, counsel, and judge. She asked herself over and over, did I do enough? She replayed every second of compressions, every pulse check, every breath she'd forced into him using the techniques learned in training. Maybe she pressed too hard. Maybe not hard enough. Could she have pressed in the wrong spot? No one answered, except the clock's steady tick. Her hands rested on her chest, still feeling the warmth and weight of him under each compression. She could sense every bruise, every burn, not on her body, but from unexplained pain. Each heartbeat was a soft blow to her memory, reminding her someone had lain on a cold floor and she had chosen not to let go. But was that enough? Night after night, Ellie couldn't sleep. She dozed for minutes, then jerked awake, feeling like she just let something invaluable slip through her grasp. The dreams were hazy, but always involved blood, sirens, and a pair of eyes staring through her, unnamed, yet piercing. Once, she rose in the middle of the night and opened her medicine cabinet, then froze. Not because she needed drugs, but simply because she had to do something, anything, to fill the dreadful void spreading like cold water beneath her door. The next morning, she looked in the mirror and saw bloodshot eyes rimmed with dark circles. Her face was pale, her lips dry. She no longer saw a nurse. She saw someone awaiting judgment. Not by doctors or by police, but by herself. And what pains her most is that no one else seems to understand how important that judgment is. But if a life once rested in her hands, could she continue living without knowing whether she saved it or lost it forever? That morning began like every sleepless one before it, in silence. Arizona's sky remained a dry, relentless blue. The sun hung motionless in its arc, as if nothing had ever happened. But for Ellie, everything felt quietly warped, as if the world had shifted on its axis and she alone kept spinning in her old inertia. She sat wordless at the tiny kitchen counter, fingers curled around a mug of coffee long since gone cold. The clock read 8:17, an arbitrary number. Nothing special, yet she knew she'd never forget it. A knock sounded precise and sharp, like a blade tapping against the rim of a glass. No hurry, no stammer, just decisive, as though whoever stood there was certain they were in the right place at the right moment. Ellie didn't answer immediately. For a split second, her heart skipped, not from fear, but something harder to name. A fragile spark of hope entwined with the dread of it being snuffed out. She set the mug down, her palm slick with sweat, and rose to the door. When she opened it, 3 men stood there. 2 in crisp army uniforms, neat, composed, faces no longer young, but not yet old. The third wore civilian clothes, a dark wool jacket with a small Department of Defense badge pinned to the lapel. They said nothing at first. They simply stood respectful yet not cold. The older soldier tilted his head and spoke in a low voice. You're Ellie Hart, correct? She nodded, unable to find her voice. Then, without flourish or hesitation, the soldier continued. Walter Beckett is alive. He pulled through. And he wanted you to know. Those words felt like the final lifeline tethering her to the earth. Her knees buckled not from weakness, but reflex, unable to bear news too immense to stand on. One of the soldiers immediately stepped forward and caught her gently by the arms as though supporting a wounded comrade. He said nothing, giving her a private moment. Ellie pressed a hand against the doorframe as tears slipped free without warning, not sobs, but quietly, like a desert rain, sudden, precious, easing months of thirst. A while later, they invited her inside. The man in civilian clothes approached with a small leather pouch. Not papers, not an ID. Instead, he revealed a small, round metal object nestled in deep green velvet. A challenge coin, but not the tourist trinket variety. This was authentic. Substantial metal weight, the sealed trident embossed on the front, the Task Force 6 emblem on the back, the special unit once deployed under Somali command. Along the edge, barely legible unless you squinted, the motto read, Respect, Loyalty, Brotherhood. The soldier held it out to Ellie with both hands. He said, This is the only way he knows to thank you, and the only way he could say, You are one of us. Ellie lifted the coin. It was cool to the touch, weighty, a small object bearing invisible weight, the honor of a unit whose members seldom receive such acknowledgement. She traced the metal surface, fingers trembling as if afraid to awaken something vast and sleeping within her. No one spoke again. They let her be, letting the coin say the rest, letting Walter's presence, one she hadn't dared revisit since the blood-spattered floor, resonate through the solemn engraving. She took a steadying breath, eyes glistening, no explanation needed. She understood this was not a reward, this was a declaration, that in the moment a man fell, she did not step back. And to those soldiers that is sacred, some doors do not open with keys but with courage. Today, Ellie had just crossed such a threshold. The VA hospital corridor that afternoon was bathed in a dim, antiseptic white light that chilled the soul. The hum of ventilation systems, the steady roll of gurney wheels, and the intercom calling patient names formed a monotonous, soulless backdrop. Ellie walked slowly through that space, clutching a bouquet of white daisies, her heart skipping a beat with each step closer. It wasn't fear. It was something she couldn't name. Neither joy nor pure relief, but a misty warmth over her chest, both comforting and wrenching at once. Room 214 sat at the far end of the hall. The door was ajar. Through the crack, Ellie caught sight of a familiar silhouette, a gaunt figure on the bed, an IV line in his hand, his hospital gown faded. And those eyes still, that same piercing gaze, as if he were silently surveying a battlefield only he could see. She knocked lightly. The door creaked open. Walter Beckett turned his head. His eyes moved slowly before settling on her. In that moment, they shared a private space where every outside noise fell away. Ellie approached, still holding the daisies. Flowers of steadfastness. She had chosen them instinctively. She placed the bouquet on the bedside table, uncertain how to begin. But Walter broke the silence, not with a loud voice, but with a faint smile tugging at his lips. You told me I wasn't allowed to die, he rasped, voice hoarse but not weak. I don't feel like yelling back, but I guess you win. Ellie's throat tightened. A small laugh escaped not from joy, but from the release of all the weight pressing on her chest. A space just big enough to breathe. They said nothing of the robbery, nothing of the blood, the cold floor, or his unhealed wound. Instead, they spoke of other things, ordinary life, scarred by fractures. Walter told her of a close friend who fell in Mosul. No one brought his body home. No one held his hand when he died. Walter said he never feared death itself, only dying alone, unseen, unremembered. Ellie remained silent, sitting with her hand on the cold metal rail, feeling the real presence of someone here alive, breathing, recounting his story. Sometimes, merely listening is enough to keep someone whole for a while longer. After a time when the late afternoon sun began to touch the edge of the bed, Walter reached into his drawer and produced a small envelope. The paper was slightly creased, the handwriting plain but resolute. He handed it to Ellie without another word. "For you. You don't have to open it here." Ellie took it. A small piece of paper heavy with someone else's memories. She didn't open it or ask questions, simply clutched it in her hand like a silent thank you. She rose and offered a quiet goodbye, unsure if they'd meet again. But as she turned, she heard Walter's gentle voice, not the voice of a battle-hardened veteran, but of a man relearning that someone can truly care. "Thank you for not walking away." Ellie didn't look back. She only tightened her grip on the envelope. In her heart, she felt something soothe. Not an ending, but a timely seam closing a wound before it could tear everything apart. Some encounters aren't arranged in advance, but those unexpected moments are where light breaks through to reveal the humanity that war once tried to bury. Perhaps within each of us resides a bit of Walter, exhausted, withdrawn, once convinced he wasn't worth saving. And within us also a bit of Ellie, fragile yet unwavering, silent yet courageous in the crucial moment. Today's story is not merely about a rescue. It is about presence being exactly where and when it matters, with one's whole heart. If you've ever believed your actions were too small to matter, remember this. It was a pair of trembling hands that preserved a life on the verge of surrender. And sometimes, the most profound thing you can do is to stay. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If this story moved you, please leave a comment. Share a time when you held someone back, or when someone held you. Don't forget to subscribe and share the video to spread kindness. We cannot change the whole world, but we can change someone's world simply by staying with them a little longer.